Your wine is poisoned, the maid's toddler signed. The billionaire went silent. I wasn't going to share this, but I have to. Because what this little girl did at that dinner table still gives me chills. She was 3 years old. She couldn't speak a single word out loud. And yet, with 2 small fingers pressed against her lips and one tiny hand pointing at a wine glass, she saved a man's life. Stay with me, because what happened after that moment is something I don't think you'll ever forget. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Today's story is one about silence, trust, and a bond nobody expected between a cold, guarded billionaire and a little girl who had never spoken a single word in her life. It's emotional. It's suspenseful. And I promise you, the ending will stay with you long after the video ends. Let's get into it. The house on Ridgemorn Hill had 42 rooms, and Daniel Whitfield ate dinner alone in every single one of them. At 34, Daniel was the kind of man magazines loved to write about. Self-made, sharp-jawed, worth more money than entire small countries. But nobody wrote about the real Daniel. The one who checked the locks twice before bed. The one who had his food tested before every meal, ever since his parents died 11 years ago. Both of them, on the same night, from something that was never officially explained. The official report said heart failure. Daniel never believed it. He trusted almost no one. His household staff rotated every few months, hired through an agency, kept at arm's length. He didn't learn their names if he could help it. It was easier that way. That changed the week Elena Cruz walked through his door. She was hired as a housekeeper, mid-30s, quiet, capable, the kind of woman who did her work and asked for nothing extra. She came with one condition, stated plainly to the head of staff. Her daughter, Mia, would need to stay with her during work hours. There was no one else to watch her. Daniel almost said no. He didn't want a child running through his house, touching things, making noise, becoming one more thing he had to manage. But something in Elena's eyes, a tired kind of steadiness, like a woman who had already survived the worst thing life could throw at her, made him pause. One condition, he said. She stays out of my way. Elena nodded. She will. She's very quiet. He didn't understand what that meant until the next morning, when he saw Mia for the first time. She was small for 3, with big dark curls pulled into a bun and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She sat in the corner of the kitchen with a coloring book, and when Elena spoke to her, the little girl didn't answer with words. Her hands moved instead, quick, practiced shapes in the air. She's deaf, Elena explained quietly, seeing his confusion. Since she was 1. A fever. We use sign language. Daniel had never met anyone who talked with their hands. He watched Mia sign something to her mother, watched Elena smile and sign back, and felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, something between curiosity and discomfort. He wasn't a man who understood softness. He'd built his entire life to avoid needing it. He walked away without another word. But that night, alone at his enormous dining table, eating a meal he barely tasted, he found himself thinking about the little girl who spoke with silence. He didn't know yet that in a few short weeks, that same silence would be the only thing standing between him and death. Nobody in that house knew that a child too young to speak was about to see something the adults had all missed. Days turned into weeks. Mia became a quiet fixture in Daniel's massive, lonely home, always in the corner of whatever room her mother was cleaning, always watching. Daniel told himself he barely noticed her. That was a lie. He noticed the way she lined up her crayons by color before she started drawing. He noticed how she flinched at loud noises but never cried, just went still, like she was used to bracing for things. He noticed, one afternoon, that she had drawn a picture of him, a stick figure in a suit, standing very alone in a very big house, and left it on the table without a word before disappearing after her mother. He kept the drawing. He didn't tell anyone that. Elena, for her part, ran the household with a calm efficiency Daniel had never experienced from staff before. She didn't flatter him. She didn't pretend not to notice how empty the house felt. Once, folding linens in the hallway, she said simply, "This house is very big for one person," and then went back to work like she hadn't said anything at all. Daniel started, without quite realizing it, timing his evenings around when Elena and Mia were still in the house. He started leaving his study door open. He started learning a few signs, clumsy ones, hello, thank you, just so Mia's small face would light up the way it did when someone tried. He told himself this was nothing. He told himself he was still the same guarded man who trusted no one. But there was a night, about 3 weeks in, that cracked something open in him. He'd come home late from a board meeting that had gone badly, a hostile bid from his cousin Marcus, who had been circling the family company for years, always smiling, always one step behind a knife. Daniel poured himself a glass of wine at the kitchen counter, exhausted, his guard lower than usual. Mia was still there, waiting for her mother to finish the last room. She looked up at him from her spot at the table, and for a long moment, she just stared, not at his face, but at the glass in his hand. Her small brow furrowed, the way a child's does when something feels wrong but they don't have the words to explain why. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What? Mia didn't answer, of course. She couldn't. But she didn't look away from that glass either, not until Elena came in and gently took her hand, apologizing, ushering her out for the night. Daniel stood there a long moment, glass in hand, that strange, small unease refusing to leave him. He told himself it was nothing. He was wrong. And in less than 24 hours, that nothing would nearly kill him. What happened the next evening was something Daniel Whitfield would remember for the rest of his life. It was a Thursday, and for once, he'd invited someone to dinner. Marcus, his cousin, extending an olive branch after their tense boardroom clash, or so Marcus claimed. Daniel didn't fully trust him, but family was family, and part of him, the lonely part he never admitted to, wanted to believe reconciliation was possible. The long dining table was set with 2 places. Elena and Mia were finishing up in the kitchen, meant to leave before the guest arrived. Marcus arrived early, all smiles, complimenting the house, pouring the wine himself with practiced charm before Daniel had even sat down, an oddly familiar gesture from a man who rarely lifted a finger for anyone. Daniel Saturday lifted his glass. And that's when it happened. Mia came running from the kitchen doorway, faster than her small legs had ever moved in that house, her mother calling after her in alarm. She didn't stop at the table's edge the way she normally would have, shy and hesitant. She ran straight to Daniel's side, grabbed his sleeve with one small hand, and with the other, made 2 urgent signs, the same ones, over and over, her small face tight with fear. Fingers pressed together, moving from her mouth outward. Then a fist striking her open palm. Daniel didn't know sign language well enough to understand. But Elena, rushing in behind her, went white as a sheet. "She's signing poison," Elena whispered, staring at the wine glass in Daniel's hand. "She's saying, drink is poison." For a moment, nobody in that room moved. Marcus let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "She's a child, Daniel, she doesn't know what she's signing," but something in his voice cracked at the edges, something too fast, too defensive. Daniel looked down at his goddaughter, no, not his goddaughter, just the housekeeper's daughter, except in that instant she felt like so much more, and he saw the raw terror in her eyes. Not confusion. Not a toddler playing games. Real, desperate fear. He set the glass down without drinking. "Daniel, don't be ridiculous," Marcus said. "Too quickly now." But Daniel had spent 11 years since his parents' unexplained deaths learning to trust his instincts over other people's reassurances. He called for his head of security instead of picking the glass back up. Within the hour, a private lab technician, the same one Daniel quietly kept on retainer since his parents died, arrived to test the wine. The results came back at 1:47 in the morning. The wine was laced with a slow-acting toxin. "Enough," the technician said quietly, "to stop a grown man's heart within 6 hours and leave almost no trace by the time anyone would have thought to look." Daniel sat alone in his study long after Marcus had been quietly, forcibly escorted from the property, staring at that lab report, his hands unsteady for the first time in over a decade. He thought of his parents. He thought of the report that had called it heart failure. And he thought of a 3-year-old girl who couldn't speak a single word, who had run across a room faster than fear itself to save a man who barely deserved saving. He didn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about her small hands, moving in silence, screaming the loudest warning he had ever received in his life. The truth, once it started coming out, didn't stop. The morning after the poisoning attempt, Daniel didn't go to the office. He sat in his kitchen instead, waiting for Elena and Mia to arrive, feeling something he hadn't felt in 11 years, gratitude so large it embarrassed him. When Mia walked in, small and uncertain, unsure if she was in trouble for the chaos of the night before, Daniel knelt down to her eye level, something he had never done for anyone in that house. He didn't know much sign language, but he'd stayed up half the night learning 3 words from a video on his phone. "Thank you," he signed, slow and clumsy. "You saved me." Mia's face broke into the widest smile he had ever seen. She signed something back, fast and easy, the way children do. Elena, watching from the doorway with tears in her eyes, translated softly. She says, "I heard your heart was sad. I didn't want it to stop." Daniel had to turn away for a moment. Grown men in boardrooms had never made him feel the way those small hands did. But gratitude had to wait, because there was a mystery to unravel. Private investigators, the kind money could actually buy loyalty from, began digging into Marcus's finances that same day. What they found made Daniel's stomach turn. Marcus had been quietly buying up debt, calling in favors, positioning himself for a hostile takeover of Whitfield Industries for over a year. But it went deeper than boardroom politics. Records showed Marcus had made a payment, 11 years ago, to a private chemist who had since disappeared from public record entirely. The same month Daniel's parents had died of heart failure. Daniel sat with that information for a long time. 11 years of silence, of unanswered questions, of a house full of locked doors and food tasters, cracking open in a single afternoon. He wanted to go to the police immediately. His lawyer advised caution. Marcus was smart, and evidence needed to be airtight before any accusation like this went public. So for now, it stayed contained. Marcus, unaware how much had already been uncovered, returned to pretending nothing had happened, still circling the company from a distance, still smiling in press photos. Daniel began to change after that day, in small ways at first. He asked Elena to move into the guest wing full-time instead of commuting, for safety, he said, though it was also because the house felt less empty with her and Mia in it. He learned more signs. He started eating dinner in the kitchen instead of the long, cold dining hall, sitting across from a little girl who colored quietly while her mother cooked, occasionally looking up to sign something simple to him. Hello, good, funny, more. For the first time since he was 23 years old, Daniel Whitfield didn't eat alone. Trust, Daniel was learning, wasn't built in boardrooms. It was built in small, quiet moments nobody was watching. Weeks passed. The investigation into Marcus continued quietly in the background, building its case piece by piece. But inside the house on Ridgemorn Hill, something else was being built too, something Daniel didn't have a word for yet. He learned that Mia had lost her hearing at 13 months old, after a fever so severe it nearly took her life. Elena told him the story late one evening, her voice steady but her eyes distant, remembering 3 days in a hospital room not knowing if her daughter would survive at all. When Mia did survive, the hearing loss was the price. Elena had spent the next 2 years teaching herself American Sign Language from library books and late-night videos, refusing to let her daughter grow up without a voice, even a silent one. "She's not broken," Elena said fiercely, the only time Daniel ever heard her voice sharpen. "She just talks differently." Daniel thought about that a lot. He thought about how he himself had spent 11 years talking to almost no one, not broken exactly, but closed off, guarded, talking differently too, in a language of distance and money and locked doors. Mia had run across a room to save him without a single word. He had spent over a decade making sure no one got close enough to save him at all. He started spending more time at home. He started asking Elena about her life before the Whitfield house, a husband who had left when Mia's diagnosis became too much, years of working 2 jobs to afford specialists and sign language tutors, a fierce, quiet love for her daughter that had carried her through all of it alone. Daniel, who had never had to fight for anything but money, found himself in awe of a kind of strength he didn't have a name for. Mia, for her part, seemed to have decided Daniel belonged to her now. She left him drawings. She insisted, through Elena, that he learn the sign for family, practicing it with him at the kitchen table until he got it right. He did, eventually, though something about the shape of that sign, hands linked together, forming a circle, made his throat tighten every time. One evening, watching Mia fall asleep on the couch during a movie, her small hand still loosely curled in his sleeve, Daniel admitted something to himself he wasn't ready to say out loud. This house had never felt like a home. Not once, in 11 years, not with all its rooms and its staff and its careful locks. It felt like one now. He didn't know yet that Marcus wasn't finished. And that the next threat wouldn't announce itself with a poisoned glass, it would come from somewhere far closer and far more painful. Just when Daniel thought the worst was behind him, the investigation uncovered something that changed everything. His lawyer called on a Tuesday morning with a voice tight with unease. The financial trail didn't stop with Marcus. There was a second name buried in the transactions, a staffing agency, the very one that had placed dozens of employees in Daniel's house over the past decade, including, the lawyer said carefully, several members of the current household staff. Daniel's blood ran cold. Not Elena, he thought immediately, refusing to even consider it. But the fear had already been planted, ugly and unwelcome, and he hated himself for a full, sick minute for even entertaining it. The lawyer clarified quickly. The compromised staff were 2 security guards who had been quietly feeding information about Daniel's schedule and habits to Marcus for months, not Elena, never Elena. Daniel exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, ashamed of how much it had scared him to imagine otherwise. But it meant something worse. Marcus had eyes inside the house. He'd known about Elena and Mia. He'd known, likely, that the wine had failed because of an unexpected witness. And a man desperate enough to poison his own cousin wasn't going to stop just because his first plan failed. Daniel called an emergency meeting with his head of security that same day. Every staff member was re-vetted. The 2 compromised guards were quietly removed and turned over to the authorities as part of the building case. Cameras were added throughout the house, not just for Daniel's protection now, but for Elena and Mia's too. Elena, when she learned the full scope of the danger, offered to leave. "I won't put my daughter in the middle of something like this," she said, already halfway to packing. Daniel stopped her at the door, something urgent rising in his chest that surprised even him. "If you leave, you're not safer. You're just further from the only place I can actually protect you." He hesitated, then added, quieter, "And I don't want you to go." Elena searched his face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there, it was enough. She stayed. That night, after Mia was asleep, Daniel and Elena sat together on the back terrace, the sprawling grounds of Ridgemorn Hill dark and quiet beyond them. He told her, for the first time, about his parents, the real story, not the sanitized version the press had printed. About growing up learning that love and money often traveled together, and that people who claimed to love you sometimes wanted what you had more than they wanted you. "I stopped trusting people a long time ago," he admitted. "Mia's the first person in years who made me want to try again." Elena didn't say anything right away. She just reached over and took his hand, and for the first time in 11 years, Daniel Whitfield didn't feel like the loneliest man in a 42-room house. Marcus made his final move 3 weeks later, and this time, he wasn't subtle about it. With the investigation closing in and his financial schemes unraveling faster than he could cover them, Marcus grew desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. He showed up at Ridgemorn Hill uninvited on a rainy Saturday afternoon, demanding to speak with Daniel, his usual charm replaced with barely contained panic. Daniel met him in the study, security stationed just outside the door. Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You're trying to destroy me," Marcus said, pacing. "Over what?" "A misunderstanding with a toddler who doesn't even know what she saw." "The lab report knew exactly what it saw," Daniel said evenly. "And so did the transaction records connecting you to a chemist who disappeared the same month my parents died." Marcus went very still. It was, Daniel realized later, the moment the mask fully came off. Marcus's voice dropped, low and venomous, admitting, perhaps thinking there were no witnesses, perhaps too far gone to care, that he'd resented Daniel since they were boys, resented that Daniel inherited everything while Marcus, in his mind, had inherited nothing. He'd been patient for 11 years, he said. He could be patient a little longer. What Marcus didn't know was that Mia, curious as 3-year-olds are, had wandered close enough to the study's open doorway to see the two men through the gap. She couldn't hear Marcus's confession, but she could see his face, twisted with anger, his hand gesturing sharply toward Daniel in a way that made her small body go rigid with the same fear she'd felt the night of the wine. She ran to find her mother, signing frantically. Elena, alarmed, called security immediately. Just as Marcus's raised voice inside the study finally gave the guards outside enough cause to enter. Marcus was escorted off the property that day, this time permanently, this time with enough recorded evidence, from the study's own security system Daniel had quietly upgraded weeks before, to hand directly to the authorities. It should have felt like relief. And it did, eventually. But that evening, Daniel found himself sitting on the floor of the living room with Mia, watching her carefully rebuild a tower of blocks that Marcus's visit had sent scattering in her earlier fright, and he understood something with total clarity. This little girl, not even old enough to speak, had twice now sensed danger before any adult in the house had. Not with hearing. Not with words. With something quieter and, in its own way, far more powerful, attention, instinct, love fierce enough to notice when the people she cared about were in danger. He signed to her, slowly, "You are very brave." She smiled and signed back without hesitation. "You are my family now." Daniel didn't try to stop the tears this time. The final confrontation with Marcus came faster than anyone expected, and far more publicly. With the security footage, financial records, and the 11-year-old chemist connection finally assembled into an airtight case, Daniel's lawyers moved forward. Marcus was arrested at his own office 2 days later, led out in handcuffs in front of the very board members he'd spent over a year trying to turn against Daniel. The story broke in the financial press within hours, a stunning fall for a man once considered a rising star in the Whitfield family empire, now facing charges connected to attempted murder and, pending further investigation, a cold case reopened after 11 years. Daniel didn't watch the news coverage. He'd had enough of headlines about his family growing up. Instead, he spent that day at home, in the kitchen, helping Mia decorate cupcakes with far too much frosting while Elena laughed at the mess they were both making. It was strange, he thought, how the biggest, most dangerous chapter of his adult life was ending not in a courtroom or a boardroom, but in a kitchen that smelled like vanilla, with a little girl's frosting-covered hands leaving prints on his very expensive shirt and him not caring even a little bit. That night, after Mia was asleep, Daniel and Elena sat together on the terrace one more time. He told her something he'd been turning over in his mind for weeks. "I built this house to keep people out," he said quietly. "I didn't know how much I needed someone to break through, until your daughter did." Elena smiled, the tired steadiness in her eyes softened now into something warmer. "She has a gift. She notices what other people miss. She always has." "So do you," Daniel said. "You raised her to trust her instincts even when she couldn't explain them in words. That takes more strength than most people ever have to find." They sat in comfortable silence after that, the kind Daniel had once thought he preferred alone, now impossible to imagine without the two people who had somehow, quietly, without any grand announcement, become the family he never thought he'd have. Justice, when it finally came, was thorough. Marcus was convicted months later on charges tied to the poisoning attempt, and the reopened investigation into Daniel's parents' deaths, while still ongoing, had already uncovered enough new evidence to formally reclassify the case as a homicide investigation. It wouldn't undo 11 years of unanswered questions. But it was, finally, the truth Daniel had spent over a decade searching for. He didn't celebrate the conviction. There was nothing to celebrate in learning, with certainty, that someone in his own family had been capable of something so cruel. Instead, he grieved, quietly, the years he'd spent guarded and alone because of it, and he let himself feel grateful, deeply and completely, for the two people who had walked him out of that isolation without ever meaning to. Ridgemorn Hill changed after that. The 42 rooms didn't feel so vast anymore. Daniel converted one of the unused wings into a bright, sunlit space, a room full of books and soft rugs and toys, a room built for a little girl who loved to draw and build towers and fall asleep in the middle of movies. He learned sign language properly this time, taking real lessons, determined to never again be a man who couldn't understand the people he loved most. Elena stayed. Not as staff, Daniel made sure of that, gently, respectfully, in his own time. Their relationship grew slowly, the way real things do, built on 3 years. No, in truth, built in a matter of months, but strengthened by a love that felt like it had already survived a lifetime of tests. And Mia, fierce, brilliant, silent Mia, grew up in a house that finally felt like it deserved her. A year later, on a warm evening in early autumn, Daniel Whitfield sat at the head of a very different dinner table. It wasn't the long, cold, empty one from before. It was smaller now, moved into the sunlit kitchen, set for 3. Mia, 4 years old now, sat in her booster seat, signing excitedly about her day at her new school, a wonderful program for deaf children that had become the highlight of her week. Elena sat beside her, correcting a sign gently, laughing at something Mia added with dramatic toddler flair. And Daniel, once the loneliest man in a 42-room house, sat across from them both, unable to remember the last time he'd felt anything close to this kind of peace. Before dinner, as she did every night now, Mia looked up and signed something simple to him. "Love you." He signed it back without hesitation. "Love you too." If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that the people who love us most don't always say it the way we expect. Sometimes love speaks in silence. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room, the one that can't even make a sound, is the one brave enough to save us, if only we're willing to stop and truly see them. Daniel spent 11 years building walls to keep himself safe. It took a 3-year-old girl who had never spoken a word out loud to finally show him what real safety felt like. Not locked doors, not distance, but people who love you enough to run toward danger just to warn you. If this story touched your heart even a little, don't scroll past without sharing it. Someone out there might need this story today. Hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and share this with someone you love, because sometimes the people who protect us are the ones we least expect. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.